Nate Archer had always known luck was a fleeting thing. Born in the crumbling outskirts of New Houston, he'd learned early that survival favored the cunning, the adaptable, and sometimes the ruthless. But no amount of streetwise cunning could prepare a man for the cold, clinical verdict of a galactic tribunal, execution on a Deathworld. And yet here he was, standing on the sterile floor of the tribunal ship, the hum of its life support system a mocking backdrop to the sentence that would end his life. The room smelled of metal and ozone, the kind of antiseptic scent that carried authority and intimidation in equal measure. The tribunal members were seated in a semicircle, their alien forms towering, angular, and unlike anything human eyes were meant to endure. Their faces, or what passed for faces, betrayed no emotion, no hesitation. Only judgment. Judge Marlowe, the sole human representative, sat at the center, her face pinched and unyielding. "Nathaniel Archer," she said, voice precise, a scalpel of words that cut through the tension, "your actions have jeopardized the stability of the colony and endangered countless lives. The tribunal has found you guilty. Your punishment is immediate and irreversible, execution by exposure on KFR 9. The name echoed in Nate's mind, a world whose reputation preceded it. KFR 9, a planet alive with hostility, where every breath could kill a human, where death was not merely a risk, it was the law of survival. He swallowed hard, forcing down bile and panic alike. I made mistakes," Nate stammered, the words tasting hollow. "But I didn't mean to endanger anyone." Marlowe's eyes, sharp and unflinching, bore into him. "Intent does not absolve consequence. The tribunal operates on fact, not sentiment." Nate's lawyer, a frail man named Simon Caldwell with more wrinkles than years of experience, stepped forward. "Your Honors, procedural errors." "Enough." The voice of one of the alien adjudicators cut him off, mechanical and chilling. "This matter is concluded." The finality of their judgment hit Nate with a force stronger than any fist. He was a commodity to be disposed of, a human deemed expendable. He tried to steady his breathing, to conjure some last shred of hope, but it slipped through his fingers like smoke. Hours later, Nate found himself in the transport bay, the metallic doors sliding open with a hiss that seemed to mock him. The air here was even more sterile, metallic and sharp, and the engines of the transport throbbed beneath him like the heartbeat of a predator. "You'll be transferred shortly," an officer said, voice neutral, eyes detached. Nate didn't respond. He knew there was no reprieve. The transport shuddered as it lifted, gliding past the dark void of space toward KFR 9. Through the small viewport, Nate could see the planet below, a swirling storm of crimson dust, jagged mountain ridges, and deep canyons that seemed to split the surface like open wounds. Lightning arced across the skies, illuminating the Deathworld in brief, violent flashes. The door opened when they reached orbit, and Nate was escorted onto the surface by alien executioners, their forms clad in exoskeletal armor that gleamed under the blood-red sky. Their limbs were unnervingly long, joints clicking with a sound like metal scraping bone. Each carried a device that hummed with lethal energy, capable of ending a human life in seconds. Nate's hands were bound in energy restraints that burned his skin with every movement, forcing him to walk forward in faltering steps. The wind of KFR 9 lashed at him instantly, a corrosive force that stung his lungs and tore at his eyes. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and iron. With every breath, his chest burned, his lungs screaming in protest. Ahead of him, the executioners stopped at the edge of a jagged ridge. Beyond it lay a barren expanse of scarlet sand and jagged rocks, stretching into the horizon like a graveyard that had swallowed the sun. Nate's heart pounded in his chest, not merely from fear, but from the realization of just how alone he truly was. "Stand," one of the alien executioners commanded, its voice a low, guttural vibration that seemed to resonate inside his skull. Nate obeyed, shaking as the wind threatened to knock him off his feet. He looked down at the device in the executioner's hand. It pulsed with blue energy, humming like a beast, waiting to devour him. And for a moment, a surge of anger replaced fear. These creatures, these judges, these humans who had signed his death warrant, they thought they could erase him. But he refused to be just another body in KFR 9's unrelenting tomb. He closed his eyes, taking in the sensory assault of the Deathworld, the biting wind, the acidic tang in the air, the distant rumble of something moving beneath the red sands. There was a strange rhythm to it, a heartbeat that seemed to synchronize with his own. Despite everything, he felt alive. more alive than he had ever felt. The executioner raised the device. A surge of energy arced toward him, a blue-white streak that promised obliteration. Nate braced himself, but the instinct to survive, honed from years in New Houston's alleys and streets, kicked in. He dove sideways, rolling across the jagged rocks, feeling sparks of energy kiss the back of his jacket. The device fired again, missing him by inches. Nate scrambled to his feet, part hammering, eyes scanning the alien landscape. The executioners advanced, their movements precise, unerring. He could feel the heat from their weapons, smell the ozone singe his hair. This was no ordinary death sentence, it was a hunt, a spectacle of power meant to remind every human in the galaxy of their fragility. And yet, even as he ran across the ridge, dodging energy blasts, something beneath his feet pulsed faintly, a subtle glow from the scarlet sand. It was almost imperceptible, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Nate stumbled over it, brushing his fingers against the glowing stone, and for a moment, a strange warmth filled him, a sensation that made his chest tighten with hope and terror. The executioners closed in. One raised its device for a final shot. Nate's mind raced. There was no escape, no ally, no weapon. Only the cruel wind, the jagged cliffs, and his own wits. And then, something snapped inside him, a primal surge of energy he didn't understand but instinctively trusted. The ground beneath him flared with light. The device fired, and the energy arcs stopped midair, fizzing as if meeting an invisible barrier. Nate fell to his knees, coughing, feeling heat and power surge through him. Pain, yes, but also something else, strength. And then darkness. The last thought that crossed his mind was a fleeting wish, that somehow, if he died here, it would not be in vain. That somehow, the story of Nathaniel Archer would not end on this cruel, crimson world. And then, the searing pain overwhelmed him, and the world went black. But Kael'thar 9, as Nate would later learn, did not so easily allow its chosen to perish. Death had come for him, but it had been only the beginning. Nate Archer's eyes snapped open to darkness. But it wasn't the darkness of oblivion, cold and endless, it was alive. A living, breathing void that hummed with energy. His body screamed in confusion. Pain radiated from every joint, every sinew, but it was different now, sharp, electric, almost alive. It was as if Kael'thar 9 itself was coursing through him. At first, he couldn't move. His limbs felt heavier than lead and lighter than air all at once. Every thought ricocheted in his skull like shards of glass. Then came the whisper, not in sound, but in thought. "You have been chosen." Nate's eyes widened. The voice wasn't alien in cadence, but it wasn't human either. It resonated within his very being. "Chosen, for what?" he asked aloud, voice hoarse and trembling. "To return. To avenge. To survive." The ground beneath him pulsed, faint and insistent, as though it were alive. A soft glow emerged from the cracked, scarlet sand, tendrils of light creeping toward him. Pain twisted into clarity. A strange warmth spread through his chest, as if the planet itself was stitching him together from the inside out. His lungs burned, but he inhaled anyway, and this time, air did not choke him. It felt clean, vital. Nate struggled to sit up. The world around him was jagged shadows and dim red light, the remnants of the dying sun filtering through Kael'thar 9's sulfur clouds. He tried to remember his last moments, the energy arcs, the searing pain, the collapse into darkness. But memory felt distorted, as though filtered through a prism of raw sensation. Every nerve ending thrummed with a strange power. He flexed his fingers, and they obeyed, as if his body had learned to move faster than thought. When he tried to rise, his legs bore him with ease. Stronger. Faster. And then he realized he could feel the planet itself, the pulse of magma beneath the surface, the shifting of sand across distant dunes, the subtle rhythms of the predators lurking just out of sight. Kael'thar 9 was alive, and it had marked him as its own. Nate staggered, leaning against a jagged outcropping of rock. The realization hit him like a thunderclap: he was no longer merely human. His body had been rewritten by the planet's energy. Every pain he had felt, every scar he bore, had been replaced by something stronger, sharper, and more attuned to survival. As he tested the newfound strength, he heard a sound, a faint scuttling, echoing across the canyon walls. Creatures. Predators, massive and alien, eyes glinting in the dim light. He could feel their movements before his eyes even caught them. He didn't panic. Instead, a rush of exhilaration filled him. He leapt across a gap of jagged rock with ease, landing silently, watching as the predators passed beneath him, oblivious to his presence. For days, or perhaps it was weeks, time seemed to distort on Kael'thar 9. Nate wandered the barren landscape, learning to master the power flowing through him. He discovered he could channel the planet's energy into bursts of strength and speed, heal wounds in seconds, and even manipulate small objects from a distance with sheer force of will. Hunger and thirst felt different too. Less urgent, less punishing. Kael'thar 9 had changed him. It was preparing him for something. At night, he would crouch atop jagged cliffs, staring at the crimson horizon. He thought of Judge Marlowe, the tribunal, the colony leaders who had condemned him to die. Anger burned through him, not weak, human anger, but something sharper, more precise. Vengeance. And it no longer seemed impossible. Kael'thar 9 had given him the means, and he would use them. His first real test came sooner than expected. A patrol of alien hunters, tasked with ensuring no human survived, stumbled upon him in a canyon. Massive beings with armored shells and energy rifles, they moved with the confidence of predators. Nate could sense them before they saw him, hear their thoughts in the subtle vibrations of the ground. They raised their weapons, voices clicking in rapid alien cadences. Nate's heart thumped, not with fear, but with anticipation. He felt the energy beneath his skin respond, tendrils of light curling along his limbs. In a blur, he moved, faster than the eye could track. One hunter's rifle discharged, bolts of lethal energy tearing into the rocks where he had just stood. Another lunged at him, only to be slammed into a canyon wall with a force that made the ground quake. Nate's movements became instinctual, a dance of survival and violence. He used the energy coursing through him like a weapon, deflecting attacks, disabling devices, and even drawing power from the hunter's own weapons. By the time the patrol lay unconscious, scattered across the canyon floor, Nate was no longer the man who had been sentenced to die. He was a predator now, born from the planet, forged in pain and death. As he stood in the dim glow of the canyon, the red sky above, he realized something terrifying and liberating. Kael'thar 9 hadn't merely resurrected him. It had chosen him as its agent. He had become a weapon not only of vengeance but of survival itself. Every instinct, every thought, every movement was now amplified, heightened, sharpened beyond human limits. And yet, for all his newfound strength, Nate's mind remained human enough to ache. Memories of New Houston, of his family, of the faces of those who had betrayed him, surged through him with every heartbeat. He gritted his teeth, letting the anger and sorrow flow into purpose. He would not merely survive. He would return. Weeks of wandering taught him the land, its rhythms, its dangers. He learned to move without sound, to strike without warning, to read the pulse of the planet like a map of hidden pathways. Every step made him stronger, every night sharpened his mind. And somewhere deep inside, a plan began to take shape. Nate would not simply return to the colony to hide. That human tribunal, the executioners, the judges, they had made a critical mistake, underestimating the human spirit. They had sentenced him to death, and in doing so, had forged the fire of vengeance that now burned through him. Kael'thar 9, he realized, had chosen its champion. And that champion's name was Nathaniel Archer. One night, as a storm of crimson lightning split the sky, Nate climbed to the top of a jagged ridge overlooking the alien fortresses below. His eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the fury of the storm. Every cell in his body hummed with anticipation. He was ready. No longer weak. No longer expendable. Kael'thar 9 had taken his life and returned it tenfold. He would descend upon the humans who had condemned him, a force of nature fueled by the planet itself. And when he did, there would be no mercy. Somewhere deep in the pulse of the world, the whisper returned, "Your vengeance begins now." Nate clenched his fists, a grim smile spreading across his face. He had been dead once. And now, he was something far worse than alive. The sky of Kael'thar 9 burned a violent, relentless crimson, illuminating the jagged cliffs and barren valleys with a light that seemed almost alive. Nathaniel Archer stood atop one such ridge, his body pulsing with energy, every sinew honed by weeks of surviving a world designed to kill. Below him lay the human colony, a fortress of glass, steel, and hubris built on arrogance and blind judgment. Here, the tribunal had thought to erase him. Here, they would finally understand the cost of underestimating a man they had condemned. Nate's eyes, glowing faintly from the energy still coursing through him, swept over the colony. Soldiers patrolled the corridors, unaware that their predator was no longer human. Every instinct, every movement in their patterns, resonated with the rhythm of HFY 9 itself. He could feel the pulse of the land beneath them, the vibrations in the steel floors, the subtle shifts in the air. They had no idea what was coming. The first step was silence. Nate descended from the ridge with a predator's grace, his feet barely making a sound on the jagged rocks. The guards nearest the perimeter never heard him approach. Energy tendrils, extensions of HFY 9's power, wrapped around the metallic walls, short-circuiting security systems with bursts of molten light. Doors warped, electronic locks fizzled, and panic began to ripple through the colony's defenders before Nate had even set foot inside. He moved through the hallways like a shadow. Soldiers scrambled to man stations, voices panicked, fingers fumbling over consoles. One tried to raise a weapon, but Nate's hand shot out, and the energy from the planet surged through the rifle, sending it exploding into a shower of sparks. Another lunged, but Nate met him mid-stride, tossing him across the corridor with a force that cracked the floor beneath his feet. Every encounter was brief, brutal, and absolute. Nate had no intention of mercy, not for the judges, not for the officers, not for those who had labeled him weak. This was justice, carved into flesh and steel by a human reborn through a Deathworld's fury. And then he reached the central chamber. Judge Marlowe, the orchestrator of his condemnation, stood behind a reinforced glass barrier, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Nathaniel Archer," she whispered, a quiver in her voice betraying her fear. "This is unprecedented. We can. You sentenced me to die." Nate's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. It was deeper, resonant, almost inhuman, reverberating through the walls and into every corner. "You called me expendable. You called me weak. You were wrong." He raised a hand, energy crackling along his arm like molten lightning. The walls around Marlowe warped, the reinforced glass groaning under invisible pressure. With a thought, the floor beneath her crumbled, sending her screaming into the depths below. Her cries echoed like a warning across the colony, a warning that judgment had shifted. Panic consumed the colony. Soldiers attempted to regroup, but Nate was everywhere at once. He moved faster than the eye could follow, energy tendrils lashing through corridors, flipping consoles, tearing walls apart. Every attack, every movement, was precise, calculated, and devastating. Humans armed with plasma rifles found their weapons twisting against them, systems overloading as if the planet itself rejected their technology. Yet amid the chaos, Nate didn't lose his mind to rage. His fury was tempered by purpose, every strike deliberate. This wasn't just revenge, it was a statement. A lesson carved into steel and bone: human life was precious, fragile, and no tribunal had the right to take it lightly. In the command tower, the remaining leaders huddled around the central console, trying desperately to coordinate defenses. "Contain him," one shouted, voice breaking. He's enhanced. This isn't human." Nate's voice carried across the speakers, distorted, omnipresent. "I am human. I am alive. And I am your reckoning." He struck the tower's core, and the energy of HFY 9 surged through the building. Lights exploded, panels shattered, and the structure shuddered as if the planet itself had descended. Soldiers screamed as energy arcs disintegrated floors beneath them. Nate moved from room to room, unstoppable, an extension of the death world that had reborn him. Hours passed, though time was meaningless in the maelstrom. When the dust finally settled, the tribunal was gone. The command tower lay in ruins, corridors collapsed, and the surviving soldiers fled into the jagged wastes beyond the colony's walls. And in the silence, broken only by the occasional hiss of residual energy and the whisper of HFY 9's wind, Nate Archer stood alone. He surveyed the wreckage with cold clarity. The vengeance had been exacted, precise and unrelenting. Every human who had sentenced him, every officer who had laughed at his weakness, had paid the price. And yet, he felt no triumph, no joy. Only a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from survival against impossible odds. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember New Houston, the streets he had roamed, the family he had lost. And though Kalfar 9 had changed him beyond recognition, he was still human enough to feel that pang of sorrow, the ache of memories that would never return. Then, somewhere deep in the pulse of the planet, the familiar whisper returned, "Your journey is just beginning." Nate clenched his fists, feeling the raw energy of Kalfar 9 coursing through his veins. He had been dead once, and the world had returned him tenfold. Now he was more than human, more than survivor, he was a storm. And as he gazed toward the horizon, the crimson sky reflected in his eyes, he knew that the universe would remember his name. Nathaniel Archer. The dead had returned. And vengeance had just begun.